went through with Tom, just doing a sense check on the structure and make sure that it makes sense in terms of DCM stuff. I think we got a yes for that one. There was also a question that you had around the diagram, which I see you responded to. So I'm now on page 16. And yes, I see what we were talking about there, and they are compatible. They're talking about slightly different things. So just to reflect back, and this is from memory, I don't have it in front of me, but three concentric circles, core DPL being the first one, contract being the second one, modules being the third one. Is that correct? Remember that? And it's in kind of increasing levels of composability, I think is the term used, which makes sense. The only thing I would add to that is by composability, I mean, I think what you mean is how easy is it to change?
Not just change, but the interconnectedness as well, like being able to swap stuff out and
Right.
do this or that.
Right, but have I got that right? So your main point was the core DPL is very hard to change, as in because it has so many ramifications.
That's right.
The contract can only be changed by the signatories to that contract, and the modules themselves are easier to change than the core DPL because they have less of a knock-on. But nevertheless, you don't want to change them too frequently because modules will be included in other contracts, and what you don't have to do is to force people to reassess. And so, if there's change, it needs to be a declaration of backwards compatibility, unless there's something fundamental. Probably, if it is fundamental, you probably want to just create a new module and leave the old one in place. So, is that what the point you were driving at? Have I got that right?
Yep, that is right. You're 100% right.
Yeah, no, and I agree with all of that. And it's kind of calling out a different thing from the diagram on page 16, which was a far more kind of I was about to say practical. It's not practical, but the viewpoint of that diagram is in the finished legal document that you carry around, which just to go over that. And the core DPL is the kind of the wrapper for everything, and is the highest level of the hierarchy, and supersedes anything said inside of the contracts that refer to it. The contract itself is the thing that you holds anything that's unique, and can include clauses that are unique. If clauses are generally reusable, there's nothing to stop you creating a module and then referring to the module. That's fine. That's just being nice to people coming after you, saying, I've created this clause, think it'll be useful. Here it is, you can use it as well, and then refer to it in the contract. And then the modules are a bit like includes. So it's a shorthand for not having to rewrite the clauses. The key point being the contract holds the parameters, which runs through. There's no parameter references inside the core DPL naturally, but the parameters make it specific for the contract and the use of the modules. So that's where we got to there. I don't think there's anything to add to that. I think we're all in agreement that that works.
Yep.
So I'm now panning past the stuff we talked about last time.
So what would you like to do this evening exactly?
So remember so last time was make sure that the structure is right, and this time is to look at the specific examples and see if that works, if there's anything coming up. So, for example, page 22, the guidance on how to write a module, what module means, if there's anything that I've gone adrift on there. I've given, under mandatory clauses, a stab at what every module must have in order to tie it back to the core DPL. And then I've given examples of payload clauses. And the payload clauses in this example is a mutual NDA, which I've ripped off from an NDA I had lying on my hard drive. And then similarly for the Dcm contract example. So mandatory clauses and payload parameters. And I've also gotten some payload clauses there. So the question specifically is there anything in this example that strikes you as, okay, that's not going to work, and so on, because this is just an expression of the structure that we went through, and it refers to the core DPL, which is, I think, in a fairly good state. But this is the first time we've had a complete license stack, and it's a quite simple example license stack, but it should be a complete license stack.
Right. Okay, so so the DCM contract example, is this like just a general sort of like boilerplate example of a DPL license that would be going on in Dreamcatcher? Is this what we're trying to say?
Sort of.
Page 24.
Yeah, on page 24, the DCM contract example, what I've done there is, just for sake of an example, I've tried to build a contract there that the four of us could agree to, and if we instantiate the parameters into the clauses, include the modules, there'll probably be other modules, but it would work. So that's the example that I'm trying to build up here, and it's not right yet. It's certainly not complete, but it's the contract between the four of us. I'm not implying that we need a mutual NDA, by the way. That was just as by way of pulling it.
I'm just reading this as an example, not as in what would be signed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because we're way beyond NDAs.
So
that horse has left the barn. I mean, when we're streaming onto YouTube, it's not really NDA material.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll take you through the structure that I'm proposing here, and now I'm looking bottom of page 24, DCM contract example, mandatory clauses, and what I'm putting in here is the necessary legal hooks that instantiate the license hierarchy. So you notice this contract is consistent with the core licenses stated in parameters. The reason I put declaration of consistency there is inside of the contract you could put clauses. You could put anything you want. So everyone has to wear penguins on the top of their head, but you could also put something that would contradict the core DPL. And so by putting that clause in there, what I'm saying is, if you have put something that contradicts, number one, that's a breach because it needs to be consistent. And number two, if there's a more nuanced contradiction that you haven't spotted, then the privacy goes to the core DPL. So those two clauses really are there to instantiate the hierarchy of core DPL first, then contract, which includes modules.
Correct. Okay, so I went ahead and just added or supersede. So
yeah, cool.
Because we don't want it to contradict or supersede any clauses within the core DPL. So
yeah. The attribution clause, mandatory clause, that's just pointing to part of the DCM. So the declaration of consistency and primacy points to the core DPL. The attribution I put in there because what we need to do is to point to the DCM attribution flow and saying that you agree that the DCM attribution flow is the way you're going to get attribution on this, and without having to detail it or anything like that. So it's a hook.
But when we say on this, are we saying on this particular example what these modules install? Sort of, is this what we mean by that? Okay, so let's say I'm a legal guy and I love writing modules, and I go and I write a whole library of modules and people start using them. Mm-hmm. Is there something within those modules where it's going to ping the attribute algo and say that as soon as people start copying and pasting this or start using this library, that I get attribution for it?
Yes, for sure. Modules are assets like any other, and you get contribution.
I'm just bring it up. I mean, I know the answer is right and wrong. I'm just mostly for if anybody else is ever watching this for questions.
And actually, it's an interesting point again for the stream, really. Hopefully, there'll be quite a nice living for some legal guy to go in there and write a whole bunch of useful modules that are self-consistent with a particular license stack, and then sit back and get attribution for it in exactly the same way as writing code.
Yep. No, code's code, whether it's literal code or like code that you can't read.
Well, contracts are basically code with really bad syntax.
Well, yeah, I mean, but yeah, if you can't read English, then code is code, right?
Exactly.
It's all symbols, man.
So is there
You want,
anything?
you want to see bad syntax is salinity. Oh my god, that programming language is just horrible.
Yeah, and it's contracts are also it's almost as bad as policy statements. So contracts are ambiguous, but when you get to policy and ultimately the law, I think they make a point of being as ambiguous as possible.
Because they want to be able to
Because you can't get
fit
it's
as
like
umbrella as possible.
leave it to the judge to sort it out. You,
Yeah.
you cowards. Okay, is there anything else that you can think of in terms of hooks and mandatory clauses that we need from what we've been saying about the core DPL and the structure? I can't think of any. I think those are the three.
So when you do my mandatory, you mean like anything outside the core DPL that we've already discussed, or is there something? And you're saying hooks, so hooks. What would a mandatory hook be?
So by hook, what I'm implying there is because these are separate assets that we're bringing together. You need a thread to string it together and to state what the hierarchy is. And I think, I might be wrong, but I think without declaring that explicitly, we might have a problem because you'd have a DCM contract, say, and a module and the core DPL, and they all sit there in their own bubbles and they don't interact. So you need some way of saying this, in this case, for example, this contract is subservient to the core DPL and is consistent with the core DPL.
So all right. So well, let me So let me see if I understand what you're saying. I read a smart contract in the DCM, and that smart contract by default has to have a hook to the DCL, right?
Correct. Yep.
All right. So there has to be some sort of, to use the parlance that you just put up, a trace between the two.
Yeah.
Like it's a mandatory. Like if you're going to run a smart contract on the DCM using our protocols, for lack of a better term, then it better have these minimum mandatory requirements in order for it to run properly or compile.
Yes.
On the system, right?
Yeah, correct.
Or it'll throw an error or a comment.
I would imagine it would throw an error, but I mean, that'd be the nice thing to do to say in a head, but the legal impact of it is there wouldn't be legally enforceable if you don't have those hooks that refer to exactly what core DPL you're using. So say in a world where there's two different core DPLs, is the core DPL.
Well, I mean, the hook is like assembly code, right? So what would the user see as a hook? Like, would they have to click something, or is that just like as they're typing, it's automatically hooked, or
it would be because these are non-editable, is the way I see it. The only thing in the mandatory clauses you would have to state is which. Now I don't have a name for this, but which core DPL are you being bound by here? So
there's fragment of the DPL.
Yeah, so there could be, as I say, there could be another one. Remember the kind of anti-DPL I was talking about last time. That's the only thing you need to state, and that would be presumably just a matter of advertising. I work under the core DPL. The other person does as well. That's great. And so that clause would then come up saying, this contract which you two guys are working under the core DPL have negotiated is consistent with the core DPL. And so when you print it out, there's no argument.
Well, I mean, the only thing I can think of as a hook for this to be mandatory, again, would be something where in the compiler for smart contracts or modules or something, if you write something, you have to compile it through the compiler, and the compiler throws an error saying you do not include the header that says this traces back to.
I'd imagine it would work exactly like that. Is it? The compiler analogies.
That's how it works right now. Solidity. Like if you don't put like at the top that you're using what license you're using the Solidity code under, it throws a warning. It says you should really put like the SPNX license that you're writing this code in. Is it MIT? Is it this, that? And you just use suggestions, But that's just a warning, though. I mean, you don't have to use it, but this one would be more like a compile error where it would just like you can click compile all day and it would not work.
That's a good question. Is it a warning or is it an error?
It's an error. It has to be an error, or I mean, because if you're not trying to write something that because then you could supersede stuff, right? And then it would go to a human. So a malicious actor could use time as an advantage, where they're compiling a contract. The contract is definitely not enforceable, but the person who agrees to that on the other end doesn't know that. That malicious actor then drains funds or does DOS or whatever that they want to do in order to cause chaos. And then by the time it gets to an arbiter, then they're gone.
That's an interesting point, though. I disagree, but only I've got a mild disagreement on this one. So let's take an example of this one. Someone who is in the kind of the evidence stack on page 27 is at the lowest level of evidence. He hasn't signed anything, hasn't declared anything, hasn't signed up to the core DPL. Should that person be able to create a contract with someone else? Now, the contract itself would be...
No, you're misunderstanding. Yes. I don't care if someone comes in as a normal user and does that. It's just that when they compile, it's not going to show up on the system as being compiled under the DCL.
So that compilation step really is a verification step? Are you thinking about... Yeah, so it's like this is compiled.
I'm a DCL signatory and I have certain roles and privileges in the system because I KYU'd or whatever my level I went up to do this. And I do a compile, then it shows up saying that this contract was compiled by somebody who's following the DCL at this pragma and these modules and...
Yeah, so it's a consistency check. It's a verification check.
Right.
Yeah. No, that works. Right. That's good. And if you
anybody can do a compiled contract, but then your compiled contract is going to show up as being compiled to zero pragma, and it's just going to be like user risk.
Buyer beware.
People are going to be buyer beware sort of contract, and people can assess that risk based on whether or not they want to do business with you, right? And then that also brings up the point with certain economic incentives, because I'm working on that. But then people, because we keep talking about how do we entice people to do certain incentives in the DCM, right? Well, people who are users and want to remain anonymous, maybe they have to give up a more of a higher share of their attribution in order to entice people to do business with them.
You'd expect that,
so more
because
like
the risk is higher.
So I'm just saying that part of the incentive structure where, sure, you stay anonymous, but you might have to be 50-50 or even 60-40. Who knows? But I mean, people may not want to do business with you unless you give up a higher percentage of your attribution or whatever project you're trying to work on. But if you buy into the system more, you'll probably get a better and better rate, right? I mean, for your core attribution.
For sure, because you're reducing risk.
Sorry,
There's if you can allow me a 5-minute rabbit hole, there is something that I've just spotted I haven't put into that table. There is a state where you're actually doing two users who are at this Anarchy self-hosted level are still interacting without any contract. A bit like what we're doing at the moment. So the binding there would purely be down to the governance algo of the project that they've both got. So the contract purely at that point is in the operation of the DCM and your ability to sign off PRs against that project. So there's kind of a level of agreement there, but the agreement is purely by...
But it's as is, though. It's the contract as is.
But there's no legal...
There's no stated employment. You have no recourse. You have no pathway to mediation, or like that's it. It's an as is contract. Yeah. I mean, just like you would on Solemnity right now. It's an as is, right? If I do business with a contract on Solemnity, it's an as is contract. It's at risk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have to go through and do all the auditing if I really want to make sure that this contract's up to snuff. But who the hell does that?
Yeah.
Nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why contract auditors like banks right now.
There's also one further step into the Wild West, which is where you don't actually agree up front what the work is that you're going to do. So say user 1, user 2 create themselves inside the DCM. They create a project. They put in their voting rights and governance as 50-50. That is a sort of agreement, but the agreement is so far low in the stack that the only thing that it's a bit like if you were to create a repo and a private repo and you had two users with access to it, and either could accept PR requests, both were admins. It's that sort of level of agreement. So it's not nothing, but it's certainly not.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, if that's how they want to do business, and they find that being a proper workflow for them, then hey, better more power to them. Like, right? So
yeah.
I mean, at least, but the thing is, at least they're using the core code,
Yes.
right? They're and let's say those people stay anonymous forever, and other people come in and use their code. Well, they're still going to get attribution.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then.
Yeah, and if nothing
maybe
goes wrong,
that entices them to become more involved and participate more.
I mean, maybe the two involved are best friends and trust each other implicitly, and have agreed on a handshake that whatever happens to one happens to, crack on. You might not need anything else. But the reason I was raising that is,
I would envision that maybe a high percentage of people who use the system may not ever need it anything more than that.
I think it's very possible. Which
Yeah.
is why I was kind of
I mean, it's like a lot of other programs already do this. So I mean, but the thing is that what they're tapping into, what other programs don't tap into, what the added value here is that there's an automatic system keeping track of everything that they're doing and giving them credit for it, whether they know it or not. Like,
well, the scary thing is
that,
what we've just described as the highest risk, lowest level of evidence and confidence in the system is actually mainstay for, well, every other system I can think of, really. It's how business is done at the moment when you don't actually, contract using a lawyer outside of the chain entirely. Just it's giving admin rights. That's it. It's effectively. Okay, good. So, we're good with the mandatory clauses then.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I can't think of anything else that would be mandatory.
So it might be helpful at this point.
Other than, I'm trying to think of outside the contract perspective, like what would be in respects to the contract, like what sort of thing would I be doing in the system where I would need to have a mandatory clause in there other than the ones that you have? I mean, I'm kind of at a loss here.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this and I can't see any either. I mean, probably one will come up, or probably more, but I can't think of anything else. I think those are the important ones to thread the thing together. Okay, well let's move on for that one. So the payload parameters. This is actually just a dump of something I did a few weeks ago.
Well, maybe to declaration of consistency, would composability be a requirement? Like, would it have to be able to be compiled in such a way that's more like a legible, readable document? Is there some sort of requirement on that?
Expand on that?
I'm not sure yet. I'm just saying that, I mean, because we're talking about adding on whatever, like, I can just say that, I only do work on Sundays or something like that. And then that's somehow, is that phrase module going to be a composability requirement inside the license? Is that going to, if that just kind of shows up anywhere in the contract? So I guess what I'm saying is that there has to be some sort of state order, right? The way these are printed out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I can't override the state order of the primacy of the core DPL. Like, if I print out this contract, it has to print out core first. Right? Is there some sort of state composability requirement in the mandatory requirement, or when it's printed out, it has to be printed out in a certain structure?
So let me reflect what I think you're saying there. So let's take the example where someone has inadvisably put in two NDA modules and they contradict somewhere, which is precedence. Yeah, exactly. So the order does matter. Yes, you're absolutely right. Let me put in that as a placeholder and I'll think about that. But yes, you're absolutely right, because you'd expect, well, it could go either way, isn't it? You could expect primacy be on those modules that are declared first, or you could say that modules declared second can extend and overwrite previous modules, and either one would be consistent.
Right.
So
Right, so we have to say that, we have to say somewhere that the primacy is the way that it's composed,
yeah,
where it's always core DPL, the atomic level first, and then contract second, and then module third. I guess that's because that's what we have here in the diagram.
yeah,
So
it would be from top of my head. What's suggested would be the contract has ignoring the core DPL, the contract has primacy over all of its modules. The module declared first has primacy over the module declared second, and so forth. And the reason I'm suggesting that is because that just makes reading easier. Because otherwise you're going to be bouncing backwards and forwards.
Accidental duplication, the first module overrides the second one.
Right, I'm going to just put in some language here very quickly. 1 second. To this so we can review it later. This is not the right language, but I'll tidy it up.
Yeah. No, this is good. Fun.
Subsequent module. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong way of putting it. No clause. Contradict and what was it? Or supersede. Zero other. Supersede a clause in a previous module. Yeah, that's a good spot. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, good.
That's all I can think of for now.
Yeah, cool. I think that's good enough for now. I'm sure there's a glaring hole that I've missed, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll pick it up.
Okay, so
let them be. I say we let them be pedantic. So. We'll look for that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Crypto geeks are never pedantic. What are you talking about, man? Isn't it? So yeah, okay. So the payload clauses here. Well, there's two things. The parameters are really the instantiation of variables throughout the modules in the contract. Quite straightforward.
Well, for people who may not be straightforward, so let's just. I'm just going to say that the parameter is yes for the variable require core DPL signature. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, actually, I can write that now in a better way. Right, I'm going to invent a new term, which I hate doing, but I think there's one that's been required. So exec, there'll be a better term. Exec level license. By that I mean, this is another way of writing the same thing. In this case, buggeration. No, ignore me. I've done it on number 2. I've already been here. So the first one is, can you at all consider this without, it's not the core license. Right, by core license, what I'm saying here is we've got core DPL as one example of a core license. And does this contract require core license at all? And it's like, for anyone wanting any kind of legal document whatsoever, the answer is going to be yes. And if it is yes, then the core license in force is core DPL version 0.1.
Wait. So we said that the contract requires a core license signature, but we just made an example earlier about how a contract license doesn't necessarily require a signature, right?
Yes.
So are we talking about the same contract?
So you could just put no there.
Okay.
And you get that fact. So that's the toggle. Maybe I should be consistent with my. John, what's the name of that legal language that you sent over? Assert, was it? Something? Oh, I can't remember. Begin with an A. Damn it.
Assert?
No. It's you sent over a very helpful link, which is clean got on my mind. Begins with an A, but it's an open source project for compiling contracts, and the syntax I've used here, I've just borrowed theirs directly.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I think that was a while back, like about a week or so ago.
It was interesting. It was a very interesting read. Damn it, I can't remember what it is.
I mean, because it sounded like they were like kind of like swimming around the same pool.
Yeah, for sure.
It's different, but they're swimming around the same pool.
Yeah, they were doing this small part of what we were doing, but not inside of a Dreamcatcher or anything. But it could easily be hooked into.
I think a lot of people are still pretty myopic about this. They're still focused on Ethereum and Phantom and other blockchain protocols that are like stuck on, everybody makes money and we're all going to be Lambo owners, and they're not seeing the big picture with the DAOs and where all that's going yet.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while before they catch up. They're not there yet. So
yeah.
And that's fine.
I think
I don't mind them being behind.
I think the markup, the total addressable market, is reduced by having that kind of myopathy.
That's exactly that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, the longer they're clueless, the better.
Yeah. So that's the reason for those first two. This third one is included modules, mutual NDA, and that's where now what you've done is you've is an include. So the previous module example, the mutual NDA in this case, is now included after the contract. And so, for example, you could also, given our previous conversation a few minutes ago, include in there. So I've added random other module, and mutual NDA would take precedence over random other module in this case. So that's where that list would go.
And so just to make sure that we're on the same page, this is a core contract.
Yes.
Module, or a core contract that we're writing, right? We're writing a smart contract on the DCM. And so this contract would be, the first thing would be the contract is required a core signature, yes. And then I'm using the license that's in force for that contract, right?
Yep.
And then I'm substantiating the modules that I require for this particular contract, right?
Yep, correct. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Do we want to indent that, or are we cool with just 1, 2, 3, 4 flat structure like this?
Well, go ahead and show me what you mean. Indent it in what way?
Oh, I'm just thinking like since we're talking about this contract, right? This is the item, the object that's really important, right? So I mean, if these things are subordinate to that, I'm not sure if it is or not. Should we be indenting those or not?
Yes, for the core license in force, because that question doesn't come up unless you've said yes. Not for maybe the included modules. I think that stands by itself.
All right. And signatories are flat in the project for this contract are flat.
Yep.
Because that's all included in the contract, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yep. So that's okay. So that's flat on the contract, all right? Because I'm just talking about, and when I'm saying flat, I mean in that space for that particular.
Yes.
So if I was to say that the contract is the datum point, or the datum plane, if you will, for this particular object, these are all the things that are resting on that plane are going to be within that structure, right?
Yes. If you flatten the modules into the contract, what you just said is yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant, like flat. So, right. The only thing that wouldn't be flat is the core license wouldn't be flat per se. It's a hook that's referred to, right?
That's right. And
that's the hook.
Yeah, and there's no parameters that can change the core DPL. All we can do is include it
so it's immutable
in totality. Yeah.
Okay, and then you can't put minimum terms or termination in the contract.
No, sorry. That's my sloppiness. No, these are answers to that question. So you could easily have said 12 months in there.
Oh,
But that's, it's a question to be answered when you're pulling up. So like, how long is this what's the minimum and what's the termination? And for termination, probably actually that's quite a good example. That'll be an example of another module, because you'd probably want that'd be,
because you have to have the end of work statement, right, or end of life of this contract.
Yeah.
At some point it expires from either deliverables or time or something, right?
Yeah. Now, here's a question for you that I've been pondering. The definition of these things, some of these things that I've gone through here, we haven't defined. For example, payment. There's no definition of payment anywhere here. Now, if we're to be pedantic about it, we would want a definition of what we mean by payment. This is just as an example. Now, one way of doing that is you could actually say that if you include, if you're building a contract under a core license or core DPL, for example, the definitions in the core DPL are the only things that can be parameters. And if they're not defined in that core DPL, then forget it, matey. So you can't redefine, or you can't define things inside of the contract itself. Now, the flip side of doing it, so that basically gives a standard language. So when I'm talking about payment in this case, or acceptance criteria, we're talking about the same thing. Now, the other way of doing it would be to have the definitions inside the contract, in which case it's whatever you want to define it as. And you can define your own variables, as it were.
I don't have a problem with that.
Which one? Sorry, there's two options there.
The latter, the one where it's open for interpretation, because I think that's what has to be spelled out in the contract for the advertisement, if you will. So if I'm advertising that I need someone in Punjabi to do some code writing for me, right? And I have some very specific requirements. So the payments are going to be inside the contract, saying the payments are 5 NFTs, and here they are, or some asset management rights that I'm transferring over, or 18 widgets. Like that's, I can't refer back to the DPL for that, right? That's going to be in and out of the contract.
So I guess then it follows, the widgets is a great example. Say if we wanted to define what a widget was and you had to do 5 widgets, there's nowhere we can put that at the moment. So if we were to, for example, put, not mandatory parameters, they are predefined. So these are parameters that you can't change the wording for, but then there are kind of local parameters, which are whatever you want. Try and get the typing right. And inside the local parameters, you could say definition of a widget. So, is that what you're meaning? Is that what you had in mind?
Well, I mean, I'm saying that there's going to be, if you write up a contract, again, I'm going to be a little bit more arbitrary about it, but I could write a contract on the DCM that may or may not have payment or acceptance criteria or whatnot. It could be an arbitrage bot or something, like, who knows? Like, I'm just saying that, and if I'm selling that to somebody, that's a whole other different contract. Like, I could be selling contracts to people and do that with a contract. Like, what's the payment necessarily? Like, is it, I'm not sure if, I mean, we can say what payment is here, but I don't think it's going to necessarily apply in the real world when people start using this, because they may come up with their own version of what payment is.
I see. Right. Okay. So there's 3 types of parameters we're talking about here. Then there's parameters that are defined in the core DPL which you're using. So, for example, arbiter.
Right.
And there's nothing you can do about that. That's just because you're using the core DPL, this is what an arbiter is. There's the second type, which is common terms which are not defined in the printout stack, but have we would argue unambiguous meanings. And if does turn out to be ambiguous, then it would be down to a court to ultimately sort it out, like payment. So payment is, it would seem a bit silly to define payment, for example, but we can still use that term.
Well, I'm not saying that some of this stuff can't be hard coded in the source code. I'm just saying that, like, in Solidity, you use the payable parameter in a function to say that you're transferring assets to somebody of some type, either NFT or Ether or whatnot. So there is ways to express that in hard code, opcode, so to speak, where everybody knows what payable means, because that's the transfer function that actually does the transfer of some sort of asset. Right. I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
But payment may or may not be included in the contract when someone writes it up.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And there's probably. Let me take a note of this.
I mean, this is just an example, so we can do whatever we want. I'm just saying that.
No, it's important. I'm trying. These are edge cases that it's important to capture. So there's distinction. I'm just typing a comment. Distinction between, how would you say it? Mandatory and optional parameters, by which mean some parameters have to be answered. For example, you can't get away with not answering the number 1 there. Does this contract require a core license? You can't get away with saying, maybe it doesn't. No, you got to say.
I mean, you can get away with saying no, but you certainly, if you say yes, then you're gonna be subject to other mandatory requirements, right? So.
Well, there's a couple of ways of doing it. It's like either they're mandatory to answer, or there are defaults which are implied by not answering.
Well, I think wouldn't this have to do with somebody's level at which they KYU or signed, or?
Sorry, say that again.
Again, I think this goes back to the compiling answer, where if you're not part of the core DPL licensing conglomerate or whatever, for lack of a better term, then if you try and compile this contract, it's not going to work. It's going to go default to you're just a user, man. You got a user contract.
Sure.
Right. So
I guess when I was way back when I was a teenager, I was a games designer and worked for Nintendo. And one of the things I learned from them is, for users' sake, if you just hit next, you should get a result of some sort. Because users can be lazy, and so I think what you just highlighted, which triggered an idea, is some of these we can default to. So, for example, minimum term, if you just go not interested, then you default to none, and none is now implied in that parameter. So you can have mandatory parameters without having them decide, so long as the default is implied.
I'm not opposed to default. I'm just saying that the default should be based upon whoever is generating the contract. I think whatever level they're at. If you're at the user level, then those defaults are going to be much different than somebody who's at the DPL level or at the arbiter level or KYU level, right? So,
in which case, they're not really defaults. Let me think about this. That's a really interesting question. I don't have an answer, but you're right. I'm just
saying that let's say this example right here. If we express what this example is, if this example is specifically a user who hasn't done any sort of KYU, then these questions would get answered a bit differently. That's all I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
But if we're assuming this person signed and he's dealing with somebody, or she's dealing with somebody who's also signed, then these questions get answered vastly differently.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And the local parameters thing, the allowing inside the contract to define your own definitions, as it were, that you can then use in the clauses. I think that's a good idea.
Right. No, I think so too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think people should be able to assign their own definitions, but whenever they use those definitions and whatever actions the code takes, it's going to have to use the default parameters that we assign to the opcode.
Yes.
So when I say I release payment, that payment's going to hit the payable function or whatever we decide it is, or pay to transfer from, or whatever that function is, whatever we name it. That's the thing that's going to be called
Right.
and sent to somebody else, right? That they have no control over. That's what has to be done. So if you write that contract, that has to be included in the contract, or it won't function correctly. When you hit compile, there's going to be a warning saying this isn't written properly.
And you'll not
it's
get
just going to send funds to itself, and it's going to revert. So
you're not going to get your validation, and then
right.
Over to you, sunshine.
Right.
So, and with everything else, if we leave it that you can define local parameters, then it will go something like this. So I'm now on top of page 26. Local parameter definitions, local parameter, and using the same syntax, it'll be like you probably not get that reference at all. It's a very local suite. It's a bold
am I
suite.
supposed to be like mildly like annoyed by this, or some sort of inside joke that
No, it's a British thing. It's not even a British thing. It's a 1970s British thing. So it's can use it without a namespace cache with some confidence. So then so you defined a widget inside the payload clauses. You could say we are. Let me follow this thought through to the end here. So, and this is free text, so you can put in anything, stuff to be built, and you could say, you would want a widget and something like number of widgets, and you'd set that 5, say, for example, something to put about widgets. I'm over-indexing on these curly bracket things, I know, but we'll go for it for now.
Yeah.
To be built.
Do we need to? Do you think that? This is just kind of more of a Tom question, but do you think that these sort of function parameters are going to require some sort of view state to them as they're being called?
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
So like internal means that the function's only being called within the contract, and then view state would be like more of a state parameter.
It would need to be, because these are otherwise we get namespace clashes all over the place.
Being like any contract can interact with this via some sort of hook trace functionality.
Yeah, I would imagine it's so, because we could agree this contract. Two other guys could agree same contract, call widgets, and then we could do business together. We don't want those two definitions having to be reconciled. So yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, like, because some people might want the view functionality set to private or internal or something where it doesn't interact or cause conflict or collision with other contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's two things. There's view and there's kind of logical conflict of the namespace. I would say if you define local parameters, then the scope of that local parameters is just that contract and nothing else. So you could write anything in there, and it doesn't apply anywhere else.
Oh, sure. No, that of course. No, what I'm saying is that with other smart contracts, if there's an external function in a Selenium contract, anybody can call that function in VTime unless there's some sort of while or assert
I see.
Variable attachment. So
I think
it's more of an access control or something like that. So
yeah, I would say that clauses inside of a contract are not by default executable in any other contract unless the person who wrote that puts it into a module. Because if it's going to be useful more than once, that's the kind of litmus test. Then you should be putting it into a module, and then it comes under the module flow.
Well, again, I don't know what's in Tom's head about this, like, because if I write a piece of code and I want it to be, what we're saying is that now, if you want a piece of code to be able to be used universally in as a library function of some type, then you have to write it in a very specific way, or it's not going to be called the way you think it will be called.
Yes.
You won't get the attribution that you're thinking that you might get, right?
Yeah, exactly, and exactly the same here. I think I get what you're saying. Let's see if we can reflect it back. Exactly analogous to libraries. A clause or even a full contract that you want to make available to others, you would create a module, and there'll be a flow in there which we haven't talked about at all, which is how do you publish a module. But once it's published in module, it would have the correct format, say the correct mandatory clauses and so on, and be available for whoever that you want, that you've advertised under your ACL. Exactly like a library. It's very much like a library.
Okay. I'm just saying that we're now saying that there's going to have to be a SOP for that. So
yeah, we haven't touched on that at all yet. Let me again. It's probably not. I'm gonna stick it down here, but that's probably a backlog thing. Recipe for turning clauses to module can be widely used. Yeah, that definitely feels like a backlog thing, but you're absolutely right. Actually, it's exactly the same as how do you publish a module of any kind, isn't it? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Right, where did we get to?
We are at. I guess we're up to. Maybe sweat acceptance criteria, or.
If I can roll back, actually, there's a couple of things I'd like to draw out. I'm going to dance around slightly because we talked on payment, but also assets to be produced are quite important. So the real kind of whole point of any contract really is what you asked me to do and how much I'm going to get for it. So those it's critical that we've nailed exactly where those go in the overall flow. So what was reference page? Just give me a second. Reference page 19 in this structure. This is actually where this is the contract object. And before I forget, at the end of this call, I'd love to talk to you about artifact and ghost and so on, but put that to one side. This is the contract object where the contract actually lives, and inside that contract, as part of our standard structure for any object, we've got governance and we've got attribution. So what drawing out there, and just to make sure that there's no gotchas, when talking about payment clauses and how we alter the contract in the future if we want to, then we fall back on exactly the same PR routine as anything else. It's a contract is no different from anything else. It's got metadata around governance, output, attribution. There's actually other things, including comments and so on. And the contract may well be altered, but it's only altered under the governance, and the governance would be an equal call for signatories, probably. If you're smart, you wouldn't sign anything else. So that's where that actually goes. And if you think about the dispersal event, the Dreamcatcher launch project, which is the one further down, if you're following this, if that gets paid under attribution, it would pay under its attribution table. It would pay the contracts that it has in state. So let me make that more clear. So Dreamcatcher launch project gets paid $100. It's got a contract, which is a contract 01 Dreamcatcher launch contract. So a certain amount of that attribution is going to go to that contract. That attribution then flows to that contract and is dispersed depending on the attribution agreed inside of that contract. So that's where logically it sits. And that allows this kind of dispersal tree as it goes down. Does that make sense?
All right. So are we saying that we need the attribution
Um,
parameters table / in the contract too? Is that what you're saying? Is that where that lives?
no, just we put a hook. This is why. Now, sorry, fiddling backwards and forwards a bit here. Now referencing page 25 at the top, attribution
Right.
clause. So that's hooking the legal requirement into the contract that you're going to agree with the attribution as stated inside of your DCM object, and it's algorithmic. So you're not going to,
Right.
go
Well,
play
what I'm
under
saying is in this payload parameters, where is that?
in the payload. Sorry.
Under payload parameters, where is the attribution sitting?
This is
Where's
under.
it hooking to?
Actually, I've used the word payment in there, but this is effectively what the attribution is. So, so take the example of someone just getting paid straight and saying, "I'm not getting any future attribution, so I'm getting paid 4 times there." And if I'm getting paid 50%, say, then so I've half my day rate and I want half the attribution I'd otherwise get. That's the metric. So I've got 50% there for this. That's my cut. These are not the right words. Let me clarify that actually. These are parameters for attribution, and it might be a case.
So if I write up a contract, the input there's going to be again a compile error if I don't put the input parameters for attribution. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, or we could default to future attribution. But I think probably that would be because it's one of the 2 absolute necessities. What am I doing, and how am I getting paid? I think that is probably a must-have. So we can't default to that one.
Right. So let me just go through an example in my head of how I think this might work, and you and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm the guy that wants the code done, and I want code written, and I tell the dream catcher, hey, I put up this flyer, and I say I want this particular snippet of code to do X, Y, and Z, and I put my payment, whatever I agree what the payment is, what I think is a fair value for that code. I put that payment in escrow in the contract, right?
Yep.
And then somebody says, okay, I'll do it. Maybe they click accept, or maybe they just do it on their own volition. And then when they write it, as they're writing that code, it's their asset, right?
Yep.
They have 100% attribution to that as they're doing it.
Yep.
But as soon as they click accept and transfer payment, once they both agree that the code is correct, and once the other person agrees that the payment's acceptable, that attribution algorithm in the background is starting to make cuts, right, to each other's attribution.
Yes.
One cut is the
yes, exactly.
Right? So,
exactly. I'd probably tighten that up a bit by saying I put out that I would like this bit of code written, and for that bit of code, I'm not giving you any future attribution. I'm just giving you $200. If you accept that, you write that code until you, while you're writing the code, that all the attribution is yours. If you then PR against the project, saying, right, I've written the code that you asked for. When the PR is accepted, there's an automatic process that releases the funds from escrow and transfers the future attribution rights for that piece of code. So you get paid and the rights go the other way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Okay. Right, and that's happening in the background in escrow. So their escrow is being hooked into this attribution algorithm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there's an interesting point. It can be more than one escrow service. So do we need a parameter to say which escrow service?
Well, I think there would need to be a default hard-coded escrow service inside the DCM.
I think so. Sorry, the reason I was asking that in my head was wherever possible, we always have a tendency to say, actually, anyone can set up any of the services and let them compete. But for escrow, I don't know whether that's something you'd want more than one escrow set up, would you? Perhaps.
No, I mean, no, I think that there could be competition involved in that. That's fine. If somebody else comes up with a better escrow algorithm, there's no reason why they can't
Or a lower
take
cut,
credit for that
because
and use their own version of whatever. I mean, I don't know how that would, what the mechanics of that would be, but I just know that the escrow service would have to be hooked into the attribution system, and then if maybe that requires a fork of the software, and people decide they like that escrow service better, and they start using that core DCM software more. I don't know. I don't know how far down the rabbit hole that would have to go, or maybe that would be something that would be a pull request on the code software, and that pull request would get attribution for their code being implemented into the new escrow program.
yes, yeah. So if we were
So
to let's take I think you're right. I think this is where you're going on this one. Let me reflect back. So if we were to take an escrow service exactly the same as an arbiter, anyone can put up a brass plate and say I'm an arbiter, and then they trade on their reputation and on the contracts that they advertise in terms of how they do business. Escrow is very analogous to that. And so in the same ways that you nominate an arbiter, you nominate an escrow service. Now, you need to nominate an escrow service, but in the same way as arbitration has a fallback if you choose not to, and then before you in your contract. So if you choose not to do an arbiter at the front, that's not disastrous. You can at any point PR against that contract and add an arbiter in it, but the PR on the contract requires agreement from both parties. So it's unlikely to happen after something grumpy happens. So if something grumpy happens, the core DPL allows and enforces arbitration, and so there's a kind of arbiter assigned to you by the courts, as it were. And I think
or arbiter bot.
yeah, exactly. Now, does this same logic work for escrow? It kind of doesn't, because you have to have an escrow service defined up front, because the whole point is you say you're going to pay me $200 for this piece of code. I'm going to work on this. That $200 at the point where I accept the contract needs to go into escrow. So that can't wait. So you really need an escrow service.
I would say just talking from this is from my perspective of going through the tokenomics for the last couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that $200 would have to sit in escrow as soon as you make the flyer and you write the contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, otherwise, it gives you
I'm just saying otherwise it was, who knows what's going on. I'm just saying that there would have to be a commit from that investment. Like,
yes.
I have to put some skin in the game. So if I'm going to write this contract and this code is worth $200 to me, then I need to put up $200, and it's going to go with this contract. And the only way to get that back out is to cancel the order and cancel it and get my money back and revert. So
this is one of those cases where this is a parameter, the escrow service that I've just added in number 11 now, knocking out all the numbers.
Yeah, I think the escrow service you're referring to would be sort of like a escrow service where maybe there's somebody who, like myself, who hangs a plaque up and says, I do escrow on code. So then someone may come to me and say, hey, I want to go through you to put my ad up. And I go, great, you can use my service and I will place your ad and I will go through the code and make sure that it's fit for purpose before I give it to you. And then I will also make sure that your payment is correct.
Oh, I see. Yes, no, that's not actually what I had in mind, but that's quite interesting. So it's a little bit like a non-grumpy arbitration.
No, it's not arbitration, but it's somebody. There's a middleman there who can offer services to make sure that if somebody's ordering something, that thing is actually what it was that they ordered, or as close to it as possible. So it's not just some shitty piece of malicious code that's going to ruin someone's computer hard drive.
Because at the moment, that decision is at the point of the project and the PR and accepting that PR onto the main branch of that project's assets. But what you're describing there is a third-party service that will audit the code before that PR's.
No, I mean, I'm just saying that I'm saying the third-party service is what I think. When you say escrow as a service, that was what that would look like.
All right.
Like, so the escrow in the core parameters is not the same as an escrow person putting up a plaque. They're totally different, I think, in my mind.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, as I said, I was split on it about whether it should be just core functionality, or we should allow.
Well, I do think escrow can be core functionality because I don't think an escrow service will overwrite that at all because that still has to happen in the background.
Yeah.
I'm just releasing funds and releasing code, right? So,
Yeah.
so as a service person, I'm just basically being the middleman saying that I have ultimate say over release of funds or release of code assets. That's it. That's all I'm doing.
Okay.
And then I, as a code auditor, have reviewed the code and it's fit for purpose. And if it's not, then that comes back on me, right?
That's
And
interesting.
I probably have some.
There's a few things there. Number one, actually, yes, having reflected on it just in the last few minutes there, I was considering whether the escrow service should be core code or should be a service. Now, by escrow, simply mean holding cash between two parties and releasing on certain triggers. That's core. I think that's not a service.
That's code.
But
That's code.
what you've talked about there is something I hadn't considered, which is asking a third party on your behalf. You're delegating the quality control to a third party,
Right.
which is not what I was talking about with escrow, but I think is actually a really useful service. And I think maybe we should avoid.
Well, I mean, that's what escrow services do in the States when you're buying property, right? That escrow service is quality control for, let's say if you're buying a property, they'll make sure that the money's there, and they'll make sure that they chase the bank to make sure the money is actually in the account before they release the property. And then they make sure the property is fit for purpose and had all the proper inspections done. And then they read through all that, and then they give it a tick mark and say, yep, everything can go, and everybody's.
It's different. It's a different thing in the UK. That's fascinating. It's a different thing in the UK. The an escrow service in the UK is very close to a smart contract. It's if this has happened, that's happened, that's happened. No judgment, no checking, no audits or any kind. If you've got these 3 docs in hand, and they've been agreed, and you've put the 200,000 for the payment of the house, that's going through, regardless of whether the house actually turns out to not have a roof. So that's interesting.
Oh no, I mean, escrow services in the States are bonded, like they're insured, like their butts are on the line. And there's like so many times when things fall out of escrow, because escrow takes about a month in the States to do.
Really?
Once you enter escrow, you're not allowed to do anything. You can't pull your money out of the bank. You can't touch anything. You can't show the property to anybody. It's a quiet period, and you have to wait for those guys to get done with what they're doing. And so many times have something come up where the house wasn't fit for purpose, and the escrow fails, and then that's it.
And
like everything reversed.
The escrow service get
or
sued
the
in
money,
that case.
the money really wasn't there. Like somebody was lying, and the transaction reverts, and everything goes back. Like, and you lose a month of your life. Stressing,
That's fascinating. We get none of that over here. Basically, yeah.
Not here in New Zealand either.
Oh, that's interesting. Escrow here probably takes half a day. It's just
that
checking documents.
That would be the most. If you talk to anybody in the States and you say, "Hey, escrow here takes a half a day," they'd start laughing.
All they're doing is checking documents. They're making no judgment calls whatsoever. They're not checking anything other than properly executed document. That's it.
No, you'd get laughed out of court if you tried to do that in the States. That wouldn't hold water, man.
So that's an interesting thing. Sorry,
that would be. I would think escrow would be in code, like there would be some sort of audit or.
Yeah, I think I've just changed the name of that number 11 to audit service because I don't think escrow. If we were to think about escrow as simply as an automated function. Where the triggers are as simple as those triggers that you've stated in assets to be produced, which, for example, would be when the guy's done writing the code, he PRs. When that PR is accepted onto main branch, that's it. It goes across. But in the meantime, the project can't spend that $200. That $200 is locked up. So, but I think that's entirely code. But the audit service, audit service, I think is a really interesting one. I was saying audit service is actually what you're talking about with escrow. So there's a bit of a namespace clash there, but I think that's a really interesting one. So it's like this is So there's two ways to go, isn't it? You could not state any kind of auditing of your PR, and you just PR against the project, and it'd be down to the project to accept it or not. The project didn't accept it, and it's still good code, say if they were doing it maliciously, then the route would be to go to arbitration. And then for the arbiter would be the thing auditing. But what this is prior to that, so you don't have to get into that situation and say, well, we're both agreeing that the code is going to be referenced through this service. And that's the trigger, not the PR for release of the funds. And you might still not accept the PR for whatever reason. But you produced good stuff and it's been given the good stuff stamp by the service. Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that. What time is it? How much time have you got? What time is it?
A couple minutes, but I mean, I think that kind of comes back into your acceptance criteria and sweat investment and capital investment split, right?
Yes.
That answers some of that?
Yes, that's exactly right. So as part of the acceptance criteria, that audit service would fit nicely in there. So if you're saying acceptance criteria is by sign off of this audit service, that shortcuts a whole world of pain where you've got that horrible thing where...
Oh, and I should add that in the States, like, you can't revert an audit. I mean, you can't revert escrow service. Like, once the escrow service is started, and let's say at the end they decided that the property is fit for purpose and the money's there, it's transaction goes through. That's it. You're done. You own a house, or you sold a house. Like, you can't take it back.
I love that.
There's no like, I want to go to court. Like, no, it's done.
There's all sorts of things you can wiggle around the edges with and be a bit of a shyster, unless you have the service that you're just describing. I think is far superior than the one we've got here, because even down to we've got a requirement now that you get an energy report for the house and you get a survey for the house, but all you need to do is have a survey produced. That's it. And the survey isn't audited, there's no quality control on that. And it could turn out that actually the surveyor looked in through the window, as he's driving past at 30 miles an hour and thought, yeah, that's fine. There's no comeback. But
well, in New Zealand, they learned that lesson the hard way with the whole leaky building syndrome that they had here for a number of years. They just kind of got out of that. That lasted for a couple of decades with that problem with quality control. So now they don't have escrow per se, but you have to have, like, there's a lot of weather tight tick marks. You got to think, like, you have to have a serious survey and word of fitness and all kinds of stuff done on the house before you can even sell it.
Which is much more sensible. Much more sensible.
Because it comes back on you and the realtor now.
Yeah.
So let's say I sell a house and I know it's leaky house, or I know it's got mold or some other nasty stuff.
And I just slide off into the sea.
I'm really shaking and I paint over it or something like that.
Yeah.
And the new owner comes by and they find the fact that you hired some shady inspector guy to give you a clean bill of health and it wasn't clean. I come after you. I can get the money and I can take the realtor's license.
See, that's what you want. You want an auditor who's checking your stuff in both directions, being a trusted advisor in both directions, who's got skin in the game.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, good.
Third party again.
Yeah. So I was wanting to pull out, because those two, the definition of what am I producing and how I'm getting paid. I think I've covered everything I need to there. Is crucial. I mean, that really is the idea of a contract at this level. I mean, you can get other contracts that do other things, but I'll tighten up the wording around this, because I've been using payment when actually what we're talking about is there's attribution, but attribution is for forward revenue that hasn't generated yet. But we also need to roll in a term and define a term, which is, well, actually, I'm selling all my rights to the stuff I'm doing, and I'm just getting paid. But payment's not the right word. So, and benefit share is definitely wrong. So I'm going to tighten up the language on this. Just put a note there. Yeah, cool. Okay, so all right.
ACO.
As defined above, the access control list.
Okay.
So is how private is this or how public is?
Okay.
I'm not sure. I can't remember why I put who's the authorized demander down there. That's the wrong place for it. That's nothing to do with ACL. Let me remove that. Authorized demander is taken care of by the governance and doesn't have a place here. I suspect that was a cut and paste.
We've got arbitration parameters, which is mandatory for this particular contract, right? Because this is between two signatures.
Yeah.
So we're assuming that they would pick an arbitration tick mark of some type, like
yes,
either default one or
you have to have
one they both,
because they're saying that this falls under core DPL, and assuming that they both signed the core DPL and so it's enforceable.
I would push back though, saying that I don't know if you really need the arbiter parameters in the contract necessarily.
How would you, if you wanted to? I've actually right up at number 7. I seem to have got a duplicate here. This is your opportunity to choose your own arbiter, or agree your own arbiter. But you're right.
I mean, you could probably put these under 7 though if you wanted to put in.
Yeah.
There, but I mean, you have the opportunity in the contract to do that, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be helpful just right away. Only because this is a one-party contract at the moment with writing, and I just put it up on the blockchain for someone to peruse. So they would have to accept my arbiter to get the contract.
See what you're saying.
Payment.
Right. So there should be well, no, that's fine. That's fine. So you can populate the parameters with actual values and advertise that as a contract that you want fulfilled, and someone coming along saying, "Oh, I'm interested."
I can say I specifically want this arbiter. I don't have any problem with that specifically. I'm just saying that we have to assume that the two parties haven't agreed on that particular arbiter. That the only way to get the contract to do the work was that person had to select the arbiter because it was hard coded in the contract. Like
right, yeah.
So they be grumpy. There might be a grumpy clause there somewhere because of that. I don't know. So is there some way that we can make it so that once these two people accepted that it comes up as an option? Would you like to? We see that you've accepted this contract. And so they send an email to the person who wrote the contract or wrote the, or I don't want to say contract. I guess it's contract. So the author of the contract will get an email saying this person's accepted your contract. So now let's take it to the next steps. Are you okay with arbitration now, or do you want to wait? And they go, I'll just wait. And the person says, okay, I just wait. Right. So we put in time lock at that point, and only when they get grumpy is when the arbiter kicks in.
I would suggest a slight change. It's not a massive one. So you would advertise this contract with the values that you think you're fair. However, if someone inside the Dreamcatcher uses Agreemail, which is essentially a way of emailing backwards and forwards to negotiate. So the person comes back saying, "I want to negotiate on these points. It's not $200. It's $250. Okay, yeah." And one of the things you could negotiate on at that point is the arbiter. And you could choose not to do the arbiter, but because the contract, once it's agreed, once it's signed up by both, it's an artifact like anything else. You can PR against the governance of that to change it. So you can add an arbiter afterwards. So I'm just always worried that so everything is puppy dogs and rainbows all the way up until an arbitration thing. So then that gets very competitive very quickly. Yeah.
I'm just saying, in terms of a frictionless environment, we want people to accept this and start using it, and it becomes more like breathing than anything. If we just start throwing arbitration clauses everywhere from the get-go, is that going to turn people off to even wanting to use the service? Is this something that can be delayed until
it can be
somebody
delayed.
actually needs it?
I suspect most people will delay it. I think I would probably.
I'm just saying, but it's a requirement for a contract. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. I don't think it is a requirement for a contract because it's kind of like you signed the DPL, so it's already kind of implied, right? So
I agree. I agree with that. It's an optional parameter. We're giving you an option to agree up front who the arbiter is, it's a little bit like getting a prenup, because you're kind of, maybe a bit wary of the other guy.
It's only a couple of conversation.
but most people probably will not, knowing that they
Right.
can then fall back on, oh shit, we didn't put in an arbiter. However, in this case, the court or the DCM is going to assign us an arbiter based on some algorithm which is free and transparent for everyone to see.
I'm just thinking that the arbiter control flow can be that if I think that what I'm saying is like I guess what I'm saying is that I think the there should be a tick box that says I'm unsatisfied, right? That's where the arbitration starts.
Yeah.
Instead of like saying let's put the arbiter in and you have to agree to it or I agree with it and we're already fighting, right? We're already married. Instead of that, just put in the contract somewhere where there's an open-ended box, tick box somewhere that once everything goes and everyone's happy, then that box gets grayed out. Or if anybody has a problem, they can come back and tick that box saying they're unsatisfied, and that starts the arbitration control flow, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, okay.
Yeah, I think we're
that way it's there. Someone can use it if they need it, and then maybe there's an expiration on that. I don't know yet. That's even another question we've had to ask. Like, is there arbitration? Is there the statute of limitations on arbitration? So,
I don't think there should be. But that's a good question.
Well, I let's say I do a lot of work for somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing work with them for about 5 years, and then we have a falling out, and I decide to click unsatisfied on everything I've done for 5 years, and it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like,
but remember that the arbiter is limited in what the damages can actually be to escrow.
Oh no, I mean I'm not doing it because I'll even get damages. I don't care. I'm just being a dick. Like I'm just being malicious, right? Like, so I mean,
yeah.
So my point is, like, does the system get DOSed because this guy wants to just put in 1,000 arbitration requests at the same time? Like, what does that do to the system? Does it flood it? So
it'd probably be okay.
I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be okay. It'd probably be okay because arbitration isn't free.
Yeah, but there's a human somewhere on the other end at that point, right? So that person's overloaded, right? So not fair to them.
What for the arbiter?
Well, sure.
Who's the human
the bot or something? Like, somebody has to peruse this and figure out what's going on.
Oh yeah. So I think the reason it wouldn't be DOSed is twofold largely. There's going to be more than one arbiter, so hopefully the capacity will match the demand. It's non-free to go to arbitration, and the result of arbitration. The arbiter needs to be paid.
No, I understand that. But is there something that we need to put by saying non-free? That implies that there has to be something in the contract up front that says that there's an arbitration cost associated with this compiling code.
That cost would be in the contract advertised by the arbiter, but what you're saying is up front. Does it need to be in this contract?
I don't know. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, is that something that the system would need to know up front?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Again, I'm going to go back to the point where I think this could be part of the control flow afterwards, where if I click unsatisfied, then I can put in how much I'm willing to pay and all that stuff.
So just run through this in my head. The way I think it should work is okay. So we have this contract, and then we get grumpy, and we haven't bothered setting an arbiter, and so when it's automatically set for us, that arbiter is advertised a contract. That contract has a fee attached to it, and it's similar. It's analogous to I get married. I haven't put in a prenup or made any kind of agreement for when we fall out. We fall out, and we need to go and find a lawyer. That lawyer's going to have a fee at that point. Now the question is that fair? Because say if the legal fees for divorce, I know this from fact, can reach into the many thousands, and you didn't know that up front, what would happen if you said, well, actually, I've just been brought to arbitration by someone else. I'm being forced to pay a fee that I didn't know was there prior to signing that contract. And it's been assigned automatically without my acceptance of it. And if that's an exceptionally large fee, I can imagine that being a problem. That's interesting. But
so and I mean that could also work towards the favor of capital as well, because capital would have the resources to fight these things, and somebody who doesn't have capital would be
right,
shit of luck, right? So
right, and you could be brought to arbitration.
That means that's worker exploitation now. So
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I guess the only way
because
to,
it's like, hey, if I pay you $200 to do this, but then I renege, and it costs you $200 to sue me, then I save $200, right?
well, yeah, I guess the only way to limit it is because we've got the powers of the arbiter are limited to the funds held currently in escrow. If we make it a percentage of the escrow, then you're never going to be in a position of someone takes you to arbitration and you've got nothing in your bank. So it's like, well, I'm just going to have to fold on this one because I can't afford the arbiter. But
so the escrow code is part of the arbitration stack as well.
It's available to. In fact, it's one of the few things. Did we add in assets? I can't remember. Let me double check up further up.
No, you were doing.
It was under the arbitration.
Yeah, we had assets to be produced, but we didn't add anything under assets.
There it is, page 7. Process carried out. Okay. Once a dispute is submitted to an arbiter, the parties involved agree to resolution. So there's 3 things: recording of the reputation ledger. 3 things an arbiter can do: record on the reputation ledger of either or both parties. Second one is release funds held in escrow, and the third one is transfer the disputed assets, as in the attribution of the disputed assets. And that's it. So in terms of paying the arbiter, it would necessarily be limited to a percentage of the funds held in escrow or a percentage of the disputed assets future attribution. And that would make it available to everyone. Say again, sir?
We might have to put that in the license, because that wasn't clear to me, for sure.
That's a core DPL thing, so let me put a note next to this. So this is the funding of arbiter. I think that works in my head, but I'll get wording to make it clear, and that's a core DPL, because you're agreeing to that arbitration, and that holds you to that arbitration so long as you've signed the core DPL. Right, I'm going to need to go. Yeah, it's 9:30. How far have we got? I really enjoy these conversations. Hope you get as much out of it as I do. Really interesting, really sparky. Okay, so we've gone through contract, payload parameters. We've got the concept of the payload clauses. Probably for next time, wouldn't ask you to comment on the example clauses because they're just examples. I think a lot. If I could ask, before our next call, for you to run through the thinking on the module, because the module is almost identical to the contract thinking, except you can't state parameters, values of parameters inside of modules. And if there's anything there, we can pick it up on the next call.
What page is that you want me to look at?
Reference page 22, module example.
22.
So you see the structure and mandatory clauses, payload clauses are they are identical to the contract.
Mandatory clauses.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so module example. All right.
So for next time, when are you available next time?
Saturday. We can do Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we can do Saturday. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, let's start at the module, and we'll go through that. And once we've done that, finally, like to get onto the dictionary. And I think we've run out of time to talk about artifacts, but in essence, I think I've got a way forward, away from ghosts, and because we've got a number of things which actually, on reflection, I was thinking about this yesterday, refer to something very, very similar. So ghosts projects, instance projects, and person objects inside of the dictionary all are actually the same sort of thing, which is you've got meta sub-objects like description, governance, and so on inside of that, and then you've got some kind of payload which it refers to. The only difference between them, for example, difference between a ghost and a person, say, is evidence. And so rather than have 4 different things and have that sprawl out, it is more akin to a kind of parent-child where you can add in the same way as we're doing here, you can add in an evidence object into any other project and you get the same effect as a ghost. But I don't have time to go through it in detail, but in essence, that's the route of my thinking, spurred on by what I think you had something similar, but you were talking about ghost. I think I'd like to actually expand it to each of those types of objects. So over the next, what is it, Thursday, 2 days, I'm going to be going through and seeing if that's sensible or if there's any gotchas. The good thing about it is what that allows us to do is actually collapse those definitions and those things into effectively one thing, which I'd like to use the word artifact.
Oh, I came up with, I started using another definition today too because I was doing the utility coin line mapping, and I started using archetype as well, so there's that, if you want to use that one.
Archetype?
Oh, so yeah, because I was trying to define the different archetypes of individual that would be utilizing the utility token and what their positions might be within that space. So
reference, is this a Discord thing you've dropped in, or so? Is a edit somewhere?
Yeah, it's in Discord. It's,
okay.
Let's see, where did I think I put it under protocol. Yeah, I put it under protocol.
Okay, cool. I'll check that out. But
yeah, it's at the bottom. So yeah, so token archetypes. So I put in the arbitrage person, or the auction person, the market maker, the market taker, investor.
Like see what you're
so those are the archetypes.
Oh, I see what you're getting there. I quite like that. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Well, how about on Saturday we'll go through the module to start with, and I think it's going to be quite quick to go through that because I think we've done a lot of the heavy lifting today on the contract, and the contract and modules are very similar. And then we can move on to the dictionary, and that will be the first topic on the dictionary. And by that point, I've had time to reflect on it. But I do like where you're going on that archetype. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah, sounds good.
Very cool indeed.
Yeah. Man.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for your time. And
thank you, man.
I'll see you.
Always a pleasure.
It's good fun, isn't it? Doesn't feel like working at all. I feel quite guilty.
All we need now is a pub.
Exactly. Right, and I'm going to often set up an escrow service in the UK and see if I can make lots of money.
All right. Go make a million.